The morning sun filtered through the windows of Romano's Italian bistro as Maya wiped down the last table from the night before. Her shift wouldn't officially start for another hour, but she always came early. The restaurant felt different in these quiet moments, peaceful, almost sacred. And there it was, sitting in the corner like a sleeping giant, the grand piano that nobody ever played. Maya had been working at Romano's for 3 long years. 3 years of carrying heavy trays, memorizing daily specials, and forcing smiles, even on the hardest days. Her hands, once soft and meant for delicate work, now bore the marks of her trade. Small cuts from broken dishes, calluses from gripping serving trays, and the permanent ache that came from being on her feet 12 hours a day. But every morning, without fail, she found herself drawn to that piano. It wasn't just any piano. It was a beautiful black Steinway that belonged in a concert hall, not gathering dust in a corner. The previous owner of the building had left it behind when Romano's took over the space 5 years ago. Mr. Romano, a practical man who cared more about food costs than music, saw it as nothing more than an expensive piece of furniture. Maya approached the piano slowly, like she did every morning. She lifted the cover and pressed one key, middle C. The note rang out clear and true, echoing in the empty restaurant. Even after years of neglect, the instrument held its voice. She quickly closed the cover again, looking around to make sure nobody had heard her small act of rebellion. The truth was, Maya knew this piano better than anyone realized. During her breaks, when the restaurant was quiet between lunch and dinner, rushes, she would sometimes sit at the bench and run her fingers silently over the keys. She memorized every scratch, every imperfection in the wood. She knew which keys stuck slightly and which pedals squeaked. In her mind, she had played countless songs on this instrument. Her co-workers often heard her humming while she worked. "You should be on the radio," her friend Lisa would joke while rolling silverware. But Maya would just laugh it off. They didn't know about the years of piano lessons she'd taken as a child. They didn't know about the scholarship she'd won to study music at the community college. They didn't know about the dreams that had slowly faded when reality set in. College had been wonderful for exactly 1 year. Maya threw herself into her music studies with passion she'd never felt before. Her professors said she had real talent, not just the ability to play notes correctly, but to make music come alive. She composed her own pieces, played in recitals, and for the first time in her life, felt like she was exactly where she belonged. But dreams don't pay for textbooks, or rent, or her mother's medical bills when the diabetes got worse and the insurance didn't cover everything. Maya tried to balance school with part-time work, but there weren't enough hours in the day. Her grades slipped as her work hours increased. Finally, she had to make the choice that broke her heart: leave school and find steady full-time work to support herself and help her family. That's how she ended up at Romano's, telling herself it was just temporary, just until she got back on her feet. Just until her mom got better. Just until she saved enough money to go back to school. But temporary had stretched into 3 years, and the piano in the corner had become both her comfort and her torment. Maya's mother, Rosa, still lived in the same small apartment where Maya had grown up. Every evening after work, Maya would stop by to check on her, bring groceries, help with medications. Rosa had been a seamstress before her hands became too unsteady, and she understood the pain of giving up something you loved for practical reasons. "Mija," Rosa would say, watching Maya's fingers unconsciously tap out rhythms on the kitchen table. "Music doesn't leave your soul just because you stop playing. It waits for you." But waiting felt like torture some days. Maya would go home to her tiny studio apartment, exhausted from carrying trays and dealing with difficult customers, and sit at her grandmother's old upright piano. It was terribly out of tune and missing several keys, but it was all she had. She would play softly, so the neighbors wouldn't complain, pouring all her frustration and longing into melodies that nobody would ever hear. The other servers at Romano's were nice enough. There was David, the college kid saving money for his next semester. Jenny, the single mom working double shifts to support her 2 kids. Carlos, the aspiring actor who saw waiting tables as just another temporary gig. They were all good people, working hard jobs, but none of them understood the particular kind of heartache that came from being so close to something you loved, but couldn't have. Mr. Romano was a decent boss, all things considered. He paid fairly, didn't yell too much when mistakes happened, and generally left his staff alone as long as the customers were happy. But he was also a businessman who saw everything in terms of profit and loss. The piano was just something that took up valuable floor space that could fit 2 more tables and bring in more money. Maya had once suggested very carefully that maybe they could have live music on weekends. She didn't mention her own abilities, just suggested it as a way to attract more customers. Mr. Romano had looked at her like she'd suggested they start serving food on solid gold plates. Music costs money, he'd said. Musicians want to be paid. The customers come for the food, not for entertainment. So the piano sat silent, except for those moments when Maya would steal a few seconds to press a key and remember what it felt like to make music. She had created elaborate fantasies about what would happen if she ever got the chance to play it properly. In her daydreams, she would sit down and play something so beautiful that everyone in the restaurant would stop what they were doing and listen. Mr. Romano would realize what he'd been missing and beg her to become their regular pianist. Customers would come from all over the city just to hear her play, but daydreams were just that, dreams. Real life was taking orders, refilling water glasses, and pretending to be cheerful even when her feet ached and her heart was heavy. Real life was practical, and pianos were luxuries she couldn't afford. Still, every morning she came in early just to have those few moments with the instrument. She would dust it carefully, making sure it stayed as beautiful as possible, even if nobody played it. She would adjust the bench to the perfect height even though nobody sat on it. And sometimes, just sometimes, she would allow herself to imagine what it would sound like filled with music instead of silence. The morning routine had become sacred to her. It was her way of staying connected to the part of herself that she'd had to set aside. The piano represented everything she'd given up, but also everything she still hoped for. As long as it was there, as long as she could touch those keys and hear that perfect tone, the dream wasn't completely dead. Maya didn't know it that morning as she performed her usual ritual, but everything was about to change. The quiet dream she'd been nurturing in secret was about to find its voice in the most unexpected way possible. Sometimes life has a way of surprising us, just when we think all our chances have passed us by. Friday evenings at Romano's were always hectic, but this particular Friday in March felt different from the moment Maya walked in for her shift. The energy was electric with anticipation. Tonight was special. They had bookings for 3 anniversary celebrations, a business dinner for 8 executives, and several tables of regular customers who had specifically requested reservations for music night. For the past 6 months, Mr. Romano had been featuring a local jazz trio called Blue Moon every Friday and Saturday evening. The 3 musicians, an older gentleman on piano, a woman with a smooth voice, and a young man on bass, had become quite popular with the customers. Their gentle jazz standards and classic love songs created the perfect atmosphere for romantic dinners and important conversations. Maya had watched them perform dozens of times, studying the pianist's technique when she could steal moments between serving tables. His name was Frank, and he had a way of making the old Steinway sing that filled her with both inspiration and longing. She would memorize his chord progressions, his graceful hand movements, the way he made difficult pieces look effortless. But at 3 o'clock that afternoon, disaster struck. Maya was setting up table settings when Mr. Romano's phone rang. She could hear his side of the conversation from across the dining room, and his voice grew more agitated with each word. "What do you mean, all 3 of you?" Mr. Romano was pacing, behind the bar, his face getting redder by the minute. "Food poisoning? How does an entire band get food poisoning at the same time?" Maya exchanged worried glances with Jenny, who was folding napkins nearby. They both knew how much Mr. Romano had been promoting the live music. The local newspaper had even written a small article about Romano's becoming the place to go for dinner and a show in their neighborhood. "I don't care if it was the clams at that seafood place," Mr. Romano continued into the phone. "I've got 42 people coming tonight expecting music, And you're telling me nobody can even sit up straight, let alone play? Maya felt her stomach drop. She knew Frank was the type of professional who would never cancel unless it was absolutely necessary. The trio had never missed a show in 6 months. This had to be serious. After hanging up, Mr. Romano immediately started making phone calls. Maya tried to focus on her prep work, but she couldn't help overhearing his increasingly desperate attempts to find replacement entertainment. The first few calls were to other jazz groups in the area. Hello, this is Romano at Romano's Italian Bistro. I know it's short notice, but my regular trio is sick and I need someone tonight. What do you mean, $400? For one night? No, I understand, but that's more than I pay for a whole weekend. The next series of calls were to individual musicians, piano players, singers, anyone who might be available on such short notice. But Friday evening was prime time for performers, and anyone worth hiring was already booked elsewhere. Classical piano? No, I need someone who can play requests. What's a minimum? 3 hours? But people eat and leave. No, I can't guarantee. They'll stay for 3 hours. Maya watched the clock on the wall. 4:30. 5 o'clock. 5:30. With each passing minute, Mr. Romano's panic grew more visible. He was pulling at his hair, something she'd only seen him do during the health inspector's visits. The early dinner crowd started arriving at 5:45. Maya greeted the Henderson couple, regulars who had specifically mentioned they were looking forward to the music when they made their reservation. She seated them at their favorite table, right next to the piano, and promised their usual bottle of wine would be right out. Where's the piano player tonight? Mrs. Henderson asked, looking around expectantly. We brought our friends from out of town specifically to hear the music you've been advertising. Maya's heart sank. He'll be starting soon, she said, hoping. It was true, knowing it probably wasn't. More customers arrived. The business dinner party of 8, all dressed in expensive suits, talking about celebrating a major deal. The young couple celebrating their first anniversary. The woman wearing a new dress and the man nervously checking his jacket pocket where Maya suspected an engagement ring might be hiding. By 6:15, nearly every table was full, and the Bioime atmosphere was growing restless. People kept glancing toward the silent piano. Conversations were peppered with comments like, "When does the music start?" and "I thought this place had live entertainment." Mr. Romano was behind the bar, frantically, scrolling through his phone, trying music booking websites and calling every contact he'd ever made in the restaurant business. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and Maya noticed his hands shaking slightly as he poured drinks. Maybe we could play recorded music, suggested David, trying to be helpful. I've got a good playlist on my phone. It's not the same, Mr. Romano snapped, then immediately apologized. I'm sorry, David, it's just, these people came expecting something special. Background music from a phone isn't what they paid for. Maya delivered another round of appetizers, keenly aware of the disappointed murmurs following her from table to table. The couple at table 12 was having what looked like a serious conversation about whether to stay or find somewhere else. The business executives seemed annoyed, checking their watches and talking about false advertising. At 6:30, Maya couldn't stand it anymore. She had been watching Mr. Romano suffer for hours, had seen the disappointment on her customers' faces, and felt the special energy of the evening slowly draining away. Her hands were shaking as she approached her boss during a brief lull between orders. Mr. Romano, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked up from his phone, his eyes wild with stress. What is it, Maya? I'm kind of in crisis mode here. I know, and I'm sorry to bother you, but... She took a deep breath, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. I could try playing something, just until you find someone else. Mr. Romano stared at her for a long moment as if he hadn't heard her correctly. You? Play piano? I studied music in college, she said quickly, the words tumbling out before she lost her nerve. I know I'm just a waitress, and I know it's not the same as having real professionals, but maybe it's better than nothing. Just background music, nothing fancy. I could play between tables during my breaks. Mr. Romano's expression shifted from confusion to desperate hope to skepticism, all in the span of a few seconds. Maya, I appreciate the offer, but do you understand what's at stake here? These aren't just regular customers. That table over, there is the mayor's chief of staff. The anniversary couple are restaurant reviewers for the city magazine. The business dinner is from the company that handles our insurance. Maya nodded, her mouth dry. I understand. But what if it works? What if it's okay? You could always stop me if it's not working out. Mr. Romano looked around the dining room. Maya followed his gaze and saw what he saw. Customers checking their phones, looking bored, some already asking for their checks even though they'd barely touched their entrees. The special atmosphere he'd worked so hard to create was disappearing by the minute. You really think you can play well enough that people won't leave? He asked. I think I can play well enough that it's better than silence, Maya replied honestly. I can't promise I'm as good as Frank, but I know the kind of songs people like to hear during dinner. Jazz standards, classical pieces, some contemporary, stuff arranged for piano. I've been listening to Frank play for months. I know what works in this room. Mr. Romano was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Maya could see the internal battle playing out on his face. The practical businessman in him knew she was just a waitress with no professional experience. But the desperate restaurant owner facing a dining room full of disappointed customers was running out of alternatives. Finally, he sighed deeply. Okay, but just for a few songs. If it doesn't work, we'll figure something else out. And Maya? He looked directly into her eyes. I'm trusting you here. Don't make me regret this. As Maya nodded and turned toward the piano, she felt like she was walking toward the edge of a cliff. Everything was about to change, and she had no idea if she was about to soar or crash. But for the first time in 3 years, she was about to sit down at that beautiful Steinway and make music for people to hear. Her hands were trembling as she approached the bench, but deep inside, something that had been sleeping for a very long time was finally waking up. The walk from the bar to the piano felt like the longest journey of Maya's life. Every step echoed in her mind louder than it should have. Her server's apron suddenly felt heavy around her waist, and she was acutely aware that she was still wearing her work uniform, black pants, white shirt, comfortable shoes designed for standing all day, not for performing. The conversations in the dining room continued as she approached the piano. Most customers hadn't even noticed her movement toward the instrument. Why would they? She was just the waitress, probably going to dust the piano again or maybe move something out of the way. The idea that she might actually sit down and play hadn't occurred to anyone. Maya's hands were shaking as she reached for the piano bench. She had dreamed about this moment so many times, but never under these circumstances. In her fantasies, she was always properly dressed, her hair done nicely, maybe even wearing a little makeup. She had imagined walking confidently to the piano in a quiet moment, not rushing to save the evening while wearing her stained work clothes and smelling faintly of garlic bread. The bench was exactly the right height. She had adjusted it so many times during her morning rituals that muscle memory took over. She lifted the piano's cover slowly, reverently, as if she were opening a treasure chest. The keys gleamed under the restaurant's warm lighting, black and white stretching out before her like a familiar smile. For just a moment, Maya sat perfectly still. Her fingers hovered over the keys without touching them. This was it. After 3 years of silent longing, after countless hours of practicing on her grandmother's broken piano, after all those mornings of stolen moments just pressing single keys, she was about to play music for other people to hear. The first thing that struck her was how different this piano felt from any instrument she'd ever touched. The keys had weight to them, responding to her touch with a richness and depth that her old upright could never produce. Even the gentlest pressure created a tone so pure and full that it seemed to fill not just the air but her entire body. Maya decided to start with something safe and familiar, Debussy's Clair de Lune. It was a piece she had learned years ago, in college, one that had been burned into her memory through countless hours of practice. More importantly, it was gentle and unobtrusive, the kind of background music that would enhance conversations without overpowering them. Her fingers found the opening notes, and immediately she knew this was going to be different than anything she had ever experienced. The Steinway responded to every subtle change in pressure, every slight variation in timing. When she pressed a key softly, it whispered. When she gave it more weight, it sang. The instrument wasn't just producing sound, it was collaborating with her. At first, Maya played quietly, almost tentatively. She was hyper-aware of everything happening around her. The clink of silverware against plates, the low murmur of conversation, the sound of Jenny taking an order 2 tables away. She kept waiting for someone to tell her to stop. For Mr. Romano to realize this was a mistake, for a customer to complain. But something magical was happening. As her fingers moved through the familiar melody, years of suppressed musical instinct began to awaken. The piece she had played hundreds of times on different pianos suddenly felt new and alive. She found herself adding small embellishments, subtle changes in dynamics that she had never dared to try before. The piano seemed to encourage her creativity. When she played a phrase with extra tenderness, the instrument responded with a warmth that seemed to wrap around the notes. When she built to a slightly more dramatic moment, the Steinway delivered power and richness that made her heart race. About halfway through Clair de Lune, Maya noticed that the ambient noise level in the restaurant had dropped. Not completely. People were still talking, still eating, but the conversations had become softer, more intimate. It was as if the music was creating a bubble of peace around each table. She glanced up briefly and caught Mrs. Henderson's eye. The older woman was smiling, her hand resting gently on her husband's arm as they listened. At the business table, the intense discussion about contracts and percentages had given way to more relaxed conversation. Even the servers seemed to be moving more gracefully, as if the music was choreographing their movements. As Clair de Lune came to its gentle conclusion, Maya felt a moment of panic. What should she play next? She hadn't prepared a set list. She had been so focused on just getting through one song that she hadn't thought beyond it. But her hands seemed to know what to do before her mind caught up. Without conscious decision, she transitioned into The Way You Look Tonight, a jazz standard that Frank often played. But Maya's version was different, softer, more contemplative, with classical influences woven through the familiar melody. This was when Maya truly began to understand the magic of what was happening. The song felt like it was writing itself as she played, each note flowing naturally into the next. She found herself adding runs and flourishes that she had never planned, harmonies that seemed to appear from somewhere deep in her musical memory. The young couple at table 7 had stopped eating entirely. They were holding hands across the table, completely absorbed in each other and the music. The woman's eyes were bright with tears. Happy tears, Maya realized, the kind that come when a moment is so perfect it almost hurts. At the bar, Maya caught sight of Carlos, who had paused in the middle of polishing wine glasses. He was staring at her with an expression of complete amazement. David, carrying a tray of salads, had slowed his pace and was moving in time with the music without even realizing it. But it was Mr. Romano's face that told Maya everything she needed to know about how she was doing. Her boss was standing behind the bar, completely still, his earlier panic replaced by something that looked like wonder. His mouth was slightly open, and he kept shaking his head, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. As Maya moved through the second song, she felt her confidence growing with each phrase. Her posture straightened, her touch became more sure, and she began to play not just for the room, but for the pure joy of making music. The 3 years of silence, the months of longing, the daily heartbreak of walking past this piano, all of it was being transformed into something beautiful. The acoustic properties of the room were perfect for piano music. The sound carried clearly to every table without being overwhelming. The warm lighting, the smell of good food, the gentle conversation, everything combined to create an atmosphere that felt almost magical. Maya transitioned into a third song, Autumn Leaves. And this time she allowed herself to be more adventurous. She played with the rhythm, added some improvised sections, and let her classical training influence the jazz harmonies. The result was something uniquely hers, not a copy of Frank's style or an imitation of any other pianist, but Maya's own musical voice finally finding expression. She was no longer just playing background music. She was creating an experience, weaving together melody and harmony and rhythm in a way that enhanced everything happening in the room. The business dinner became more celebratory. The anniversary couples became more romantic. Even the servers seemed to work with more grace and enjoyment. For the first time in 3 years, Maya felt like herself again. Not just the helpful waitress, not just the dutiful daughter, not just the girl who had given up her dreams for practical reasons. She was a musician, an artist, someone who could take emotions and experiences and transform them into something that touched other people's hearts. As she played, Maya realized that this moment was changing her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Every note she played was a declaration, a statement that said, "I am still here, I still have something to offer, I still have music inside me that needs to be shared." The piano sang under her hands, and for the first time in years, Maya was singing along with it. What happened next surprised everyone in the restaurant, but none more than Maya herself. As she finished Autumn Leaves, instead of standing up and returning to her serving duties as planned, she felt an almost magnetic pull to continue playing. Her hands remained on the keys, and without conscious thought, she began the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. This was not background music. This was not the gentle, unobtrusive playing she had promised Mr. Romano. This was something much deeper, much more personal. The piece flowed from her fingers with an intensity and beauty that seemed to come from somewhere beyond technique or memory. It was as if 3 years of suppressed emotion were finally finding their voice. The transformation in the restaurant was immediate and profound. Conversations didn't just quiet down, they stopped entirely at some tables. The businessman at table 6, who had been loudly discussing profit margins on his phone, found himself ending the call mid-sentence. His attention was completely captured by the music flowing from the corner of the room. Mrs. Henderson reached across the table and took her husband's hand, something Maya noticed because she had served them dozens of times and had never seen them be so openly affectionate. The older couple's faces were soft with emotion, as if the music was reminding them of something precious from their past. But it was the young anniversary couple at table 7 that made Maya's heart skip a beat. The woman was crying, not with sadness, but with the kind of overwhelming joy that comes when beauty touches you unexpectedly. Her boyfriend was staring at her with such love and tenderness that Maya almost missed a note. This was their moment, their special evening, and somehow Maya's music was becoming part of their love story. The kitchen staff had gradually stopped their prep work and were gathering in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room. Luis, the head chef who usually never left his station during dinner service, stood with his arms crossed, listening intently. Maria, who washed dishes and rarely spoke to anyone, had tears streaming down her cheeks. Maya could feel the energy in the room shifting with each phrase she played. The Chopin piece demanded technical precision and emotional depth, and she was delivering both in ways that surprised even herself. Her fingers seemed to know exactly how much pressure to apply for each dynamic change, how to shape each phrase to maximum emotional impact. As she moved into the more complex middle section of the nocturne, Maya felt herself entering a state she had only experienced a few times before, that magical place where the musician disappears and only the music remains. Her conscious mind stepped aside, and years of training, natural talent, and pure instinct took over. The piano responded to her emotional state as if it were a living thing. When the music called for whispered intimacy, the instrument produced tones so soft and pure they seemed to float in the air. When the piece built to its dramatic climaxes, the Steinway delivered power that she could feel in her chest and her bones. Mr. Romano had moved from behind the bar and was standing where he could see both Maya and the dining room. His expression had evolved from amazement to something approaching awe. This wasn't just competent playing, this was artistry. His waitress, the young woman who had been quietly serving his customers for 3 years, was revealing herself to be a musician of remarkable ability. The nocturne reached its emotional peak, a section that had always challenged Maya in college. But tonight, With this magnificent instrument and this receptive audience, she played it with a maturity and depth that she had never achieved before. The melody soared above rich, complex harmonies, creating moments of such beauty that the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. As the piece moved toward its gentle conclusion, Maya became aware that something unprecedented was happening. Every person in the restaurant, customers, staff, even Mr. Romano, was completely focused on her music. The normal sounds of a busy restaurant had faded away, leaving only the piano and the barely audible sound of people breathing in unison. When the final notes of the Chopin faded into silence, the restaurant remained quiet for several heartbeats. Maya kept her hands on the keys, almost afraid to break the spell that had been cast. She had played that piece hundreds of times in practice rooms and at student recitals, but never had it felt so alive, so meaningful. Then, from somewhere in the room, someone began to clap. Not polite, obligatory applause, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. Within seconds, other people joined in. But this wasn't the usual scattered clapping that might follow background music. This was the kind of applause reserved for real performances, for moments when music transcends entertainment and becomes something transformative. Maya looked up from the piano keys for the first time since she had started playing. What she saw took her breath away. Every single person in the restaurant was looking at her with expressions of genuine appreciation and amazement. The business executives, the anniversary couples, the regular customers, the staff, everyone was applauding with sincere enthusiasm, but it was more than just applause. Maya could see the impact her music had made on individual faces. Mrs. Henderson was wiping tears from her eyes while still clapping. The young woman at table 7 was beaming with joy, her earlier tears replaced by a radiant smile. Even the serious businessmen were smiling and nodding their approval. Mr. Romano approached the piano, his face still wearing that expression of incredulous wonder. "Maya," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "where did that come from? I mean, I knew you said you studied music, but that was professional level playing." "She's incredible," called out Mr. Henderson from his table. "We've been to concerts that weren't half as moving as what we just heard." "More," shouted someone from the back of the room. "Please, play something else." The request was picked up by other voices around the restaurant. "Yes, more music. That was beautiful. Don't stop now." Maya felt overwhelmed by the response. She had dreamed of moments like this, but the reality was more intense and more wonderful than her imagination had ever conjured. These weren't just polite restaurant customers being kind to their waitress. These were people who had been genuinely moved by her music. I should get back to work," Maya said uncertainly, gesturing toward the tables that needed attention. "Are you kidding?" Mr. Romano laughed, but it was the happy laugh of someone who had just discovered treasure. "Maya, look around this room. Look at these people. They don't want you to get back to serving tables. They want you to keep playing." As if to prove his point, the young man at table 7 called out, "Excuse me, miss, could you possibly play something romantic? Tonight's kind of a special night for us." He was holding a small jewelry box, and Maya realized she was about to witness a proposal. Her heart swelled with emotion. Music was about to become part of someone's most important life moment. This wasn't just entertainment. This was being invited to help create memories that would last a lifetime. "Of course," Maya said, her voice catching slightly. "Do you have a request?" "Something beautiful," the young woman said softly. "Something that sounds like love." Maya's fingers found the keys again, and she began to play La Vie en Rose, but arranged for solo piano with her own personal touches. As the romantic melody filled the room, she watched the young man get down on one knee beside his girlfriend's chair. The room fell silent again, but this time it was the reverent silence of people witnessing something sacred. The proposal was perfect, and Maya's music provided the soundtrack for what would undoubtedly become a treasured memory for the newly engaged couple. As they kissed and the room erupted in spontaneous applause for both the engagement and the music, Maya realized that her life had just changed in the most unexpected and wonderful way possible. She wasn't just playing piano anymore. She was helping to create the moments that make life meaningful. and for the first time in 3 years she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. After witnessing the proposal and playing through several more requests, Maya found herself in a musical flow state that she had never experienced before. Each song seemed to unlock another piece of her musical soul that had been dormant for years. She played jazz standards with classical influences, classical pieces with contemporary touches, and even began improvising original melodies that seemed to spring from the very atmosphere of the room. The restaurant had transformed into something magical. Conversations had taken on a more intimate quality, with people leaning closer together, speaking in softer tones that complemented rather than competed with the music. The lighting seemed warmer, the food tasted better, and even the air felt different, charged with emotion and possibility. Maya's final piece was something she had never shared with anyone before, a composition of her own that she had written during those long, quiet evenings at her grandmother's old piano. She had created it during her darkest moments when the weight of giving up her dreams felt almost unbearable. But tonight she played it not as a lament for what she had lost, but as a celebration of what she had found. The piece began quietly, almost hesitantly, like someone learning to hope again. The melody was simple at first, but as Maya developed, layers of complexity emerged. She wove in themes of struggle and sacrifice, but also resilience and hidden strength. The middle section built to a soaring passage that spoke of dreams deferred but not destroyed, of talents that wait patiently in the shadows until their moment arrives. As she played, Maya poured 3 years of suppressed emotion into every note. All the mornings she had looked longingly at this piano, all the evenings she had played silently on broken keys, all the moments she had wondered if she had made a terrible mistake in giving up music. All of it was being transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. The final section of her composition was pure joy. Her fingers danced across the keys with a lightness and freedom that reflected her emotional state. This wasn't just music anymore. This was liberation. This was a declaration that dreams don't die. They just wait for the right moment to bloom again. Around the restaurant, Maya was dimly aware that something unprecedented was happening. Customers who had finished their meals were staying to listen. People were ordering dessert and coffee not because they were hungry, but because they didn't want the evening to end. The usual Friday night turnover of tables had stopped entirely. Everyone wanted to remain part of whatever was unfolding in this ordinary Italian restaurant. As Maya built toward the climax of her original piece, she felt as if she were channeling not just her own emotions, but the feelings of everyone in the room. The music became a collective experience, speaking to the dreams and hopes and struggles that every person carries inside them. The melody soared with such hope and triumph that it seemed to lift the entire restaurant. When she played the final chord, a rich, complex harmony that seemed to contain infinite possibilities, Maya held the sustain pedal down and let the sound fade naturally into silence. For a long moment, nobody moved. The silence was complete, profound, almost sacred. Then Mrs. Henderson began to clap. Not the polite applause of earlier, but a strong, rhythmic clapping that spoke of genuine appreciation and awe. Her husband joined her, then the newly engaged couple, then the business executives who had forgotten all about their deals and contracts. Within seconds, every single person in Romano's Italian bistro was on their feet, applauding with an enthusiasm that Maya had never experienced, not even at her college recitals. But this was different from academic applause. This was the appreciation of people whose hearts had been touched, whose evening had been transformed from ordinary to unforgettable. The applause seemed to go on forever. People were calling out praise, requests for specific songs, expressions of amazement and gratitude. Maya saw tears on faces throughout the room, not tears of sadness, but tears of joy, of recognition, of having witnessed something truly special. "Brava!" called out Louise from the kitchen doorway. "Absolutely beautiful. I've never heard anything like that," said the businessman who had earlier been focused only on his phone calls. "That last piece, did you write that?" Maya nodded, still overwhelmed by the response. "It's something I composed a few years ago," she said, her voice barely audible over the continuing applause. "It was magnificent. said the young woman who had just gotten engaged. "Thank you for making our night so perfect. We'll never forget this." Mr. Romano approached the piano, his face beaming with a mixture of pride, amazement, and what looked suspiciously like the expression of someone who had just realized he might have discovered something very valuable. The applause finally began to fade as people sensed he wanted to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Romano announced, his voice carrying clearly through the room, "I think we can all agree that what we've just experienced was something truly extraordinary." The room erupted in another wave of applause and enthusiastic agreement. "Maya," he continued, turning to face her directly, "I have to ask, where have you been hiding this incredible talent for the past 3 years?" Maya felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment and pride. "I've been right here," she said simply. "I just never had the chance to share it before." "Well, that changes right now," Mr. Romano declared. "Maya, how would you feel about becoming Romano's featured pianist, not just for emergencies but as a regular part of what we offer here?" The suggestion triggered another enthusiastic response from the crowd. People were nodding, calling out their agreement, already talking about bringing friends and family to hear her play. Are you serious?" Maya asked, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Look around this room," Mr. Romano said, gesturing to the customers who were still lingering, still buzzing with excitement about what they had heard. "Do you see anyone who wants to leave? Do you see anyone who didn't have their evening made special by your music? Maya, in 20 years of running this restaurant, I have never seen anything like the atmosphere you created here tonight." Mrs. Henderson stood up at her table. "Excuse me," she called out, "but I just want to say that my husband and I have been coming to Romano's for 5 years. And this was without question the most wonderful evening we've ever had here. If Maya is going to be playing regularly, we'll be here every week." Her sentiment was echoed around the room. The newly engaged couple promised to hold their engagement party at Romano's. The business executives were already talking about bringing clients for important dinners. Even other staff members were grinning with excitement about the prospect of working in a restaurant that featured live music of this caliber. Maya felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were tears of pure joy. 3 years ago, she had walked away from music thinking that chapter of her life was closed forever. She had convinced herself that dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford, that practical concerns had to take precedence over artistic fulfillment. But tonight had proven that music hadn't left her. It had been waiting patiently for the right moment to return. All those mornings spent touching the piano keys, all those evenings playing silently at home, all those moments of longing and regret, they hadn't been wasted time. They had been preparation for this moment. "Yes," Maya said, her voice strong and clear despite her tears. "Yes, I would love to be Romano's pianist." The room erupted in celebration once more. People were shaking hands, hugging each other, sharing in the collective joy of having witnessed something magical. The newly engaged couple asked if Maya would play at their wedding. The business executives were already planning to bring their most important clients to experience Romano's with live music. As the evening finally wound down and customers began to leave, each one stopped by the piano to thank Maya personally. They shared stories of how the music had made them feel, memories it had triggered, emotions it had awakened. Maya realized that this was what she had been missing all these years. The connection between musician and audience, the ability to touch people's hearts through music. Mr. Romano waited until the last customer had left before approaching Maya again. "I want you to know," he said seriously, "this isn't just about business for me. Yes, I think having you play will bring in more customers and create a special atmosphere. But what happened here tonight was about more than that. You reminded all of us why music matters, why it's worth making space for beauty and artistry in our everyday lives." Maya nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She had spent 3 years thinking that giving up music was the responsible adult thing to do. But tonight, she had discovered that sharing her gift wasn't selfish or impractical. It was necessary. Music had the power to transform ordinary moments into extraordinary memories, to bring people together, to remind everyone of the beauty that exists in the world. As she finally stood up from the piano bench, Maya looked around the now quiet restaurant. Tomorrow she would return not just as a waitress, but as a musician. She would have the chance to do what she loved while still earning the steady income she needed to support herself and help her mother. But more than that, she had learned something invaluable about dreams.